Developers need to be called out for abusing their fanbase loyalty when all they do is make minor upgrades to a much loved franchise. I explain in this episode why Bus Simulator 21 is one such example. Welcome back, and in this episode we are going to be looking at Bus Simulator 2021. So quick background, pretty simple what Bus Simulator 2021 is about. You are a bus driver that effectively builds your own fleet of buses, your own company. The more routes you do, the more money you get, the more stuff that gets opened up. You have to deliver passengers across your routes that you've created. They are innocuous little shits. They will do things that kind of annoy you, and you have to make sure that they're not doing those things to annoy you, such as standing in a doorway or playing their music too loud, etc, etc. The better you drive, the more points you get. So if you curb the bus, you're going to get knocked down on points. If you drive too fast or too slow and you don't get to the bus stops on time, you'll get dinged points. You need to use your indicator well, etc, etc. As you can see, pretty standard affair. It's a pretty simple mechanic that actually works really well. It's very addictive gameplay. It's just the way that things got implemented that didn't work too well. Now, the biggest problem I have with Bus Simulator 2021 is quite simply that Bus Simulator 2018 was so good. And so with that, I was hoping for some vast improvements above and beyond just a lick of paint. Now, I'm going to explain to you what some of those so-called improvements are and what the developers have tried to do. And what they've ignored, ultimately, is the gameplay aspect of 2021 Bus Simulator. They had an ingredient there, a recipe that was working in the previous Sims, and I was really hoping that they would elevate it. And in actual fact, I feel like it's gone a bit backwards. So in what ways do I think things have gone backwards? Well, the first part that really gets on my gears has to be the way in which you create routes. Now, originally you would do this by clicking individual bus stops, create a route. You'd have to follow this ridiculous kind of strict and rigid guidance that they would give you as an objective to try and just marry up all the different points on a map. So they still have what you had before, i.e. making sure that you select bus routes in the right areas to meet the objectives. Then they've added 2 more layers of complexity to really just hammer home how piss poor this mechanic is. Firstly, there is the demand system. So as you select a bus stop, you'll see whether it's in demand or not in demand. That in itself I don't have issue with. What I do have issue with is that what the game requires you to do is create a balance. So if you have a particular station that is in demand, for some weird reason you then have to select a station that isn't in demand to get it leveled out. The game doesn't really explain why routes have to be equal balance. In my head, running a bus company, surely I just want to hit every station that is in demand regardless. I want as many passengers as I possibly can, maximize the value. Why would I go around and select stations that aren't in demand? Doesn't make sense to me. If it's a case of, well, we need to ensure that your bus has enough capacity for those individuals if you're only hitting in-demand stations, surely that really comes down to the number of buses that you have on a route. And wouldn't that have just been a much easier mechanic if you have a particular route that you've created that is very much in demand? You could apply 2 or 3 buses from a fleet to that route versus this ridiculous system, which then is confusing because ultimately as you're trying to balance things out and you're removing bus stops, you're also still trying to ensure that you hit all the right locations. But it gets worse because then what they've added is a peak and non-peak time on top. So basically looking at morning and evening and afternoon. So if you have an objective that says that you have to follow a particular route, you have to hit point A, point B, point C. On top of that, we also want to make sure that your route itself is balanced, that there's a +1 or a -1 on a demand scale. And on top of that, we want to ensure that you're doing evening and morning. The whole thing just becomes so annoying, so frustrating, and it kills the game for me immediately because I don't want to be pissing about with routes. I just want to get onto the driving aspect. Oh, and we haven't even spoken about this new thing of upgrading bus stops. Now, I don't mind so much the fact that they've introduced a mechanic there that kind of gives you reason to drive well, and you increase your bus stop capacity so more people go on the buses, and you might be able to have more buses connected to it. But I just feel like I'm playing a spreadsheet. If I wanted to do that, I'd go play Football Manager. The real problem I have with it is that there is zero, and I mean zero, cosmetic difference when you upgrade a bus stop from level 1 to level 4. It doesn't look different, there are no more passengers to it. It's literally just a little number on a spreadsheet on the map system that tells you that you are now paying more for that bus stop. It's a real shame, guys, because as an idea it could have worked so well. As an implementation, absolutely fell flat on its arse. Now, a simple fix for me would quite literally have just had an auto route button that you hit the points that you're supposed to hit, auto route it, get rid of the demand thing, get rid of the day-night cycle thing in terms of the routes, and then all you have to do is just apply more buses or less buses based on the needs of that particular route. Nice and simple. Let the AI do it. Let's just crack on with the driving aspects.
Here you go.
So let's talk about the driving aspects. The first thing I want to say is that I play with a Track IR Pro Clip and also a G29 wheel with pedals. So immediately I am going to be getting, I think, a better experience straight up front just by having those two accessories to hand. It's far more immersive, far more enjoyable. I can't comment on what this plays like on a control pad. However, I will say that in terms of the driving, it's okay. It's not gonna kind of blow me away. I felt that it's very similar to, or identical even to 2018. What I was hoping for this time round was to get rid of that feeling that the bus feels like it's on ice. I have the same criticism of American Truck Simulator as well, in that there just doesn't seem to be any head motion really throughout, like the little rumbles that you might experience on a normal road. I'm not expecting that your head's going to be going left and right all the time, but I think a game that does do that really well is Microsoft Flight Simulator. So when you're experiencing turbulence and just kind of general G's on the airplane, you will see that your head moves accordingly. On here, it just feels like the bus is on ice unless you hit a pothole, and then it goes absolutely berserk. I'm also not too keen in terms of the ticketing machine that's on the buses these days. I actually felt that there was nothing wrong with 2018. If anything, I'd have just liked a few more options than what we currently have. It hasn't really changed other than the design. I find it a little bit harder to read, but maybe that's just my eyes in my old age. But ultimately, for me, they had a missed opportunity there in that they could have really added some more challenges in there. So for example, rather than just doing one ticket all the time, how about customers giving us the wrong amount of change for a ticket? What about family tickets? If they are going to go down as well, the off-peak, on-peak times, why not off-peak tickets, on-peak tickets? Now Jesus, I came up with that in about 5 seconds, so it needs to be fleshed out, but I think the point I'm getting at is just how far they could have gone with it versus what they did. What has also returned is the management of those little shitty customers. Again, missed opportunity is pretty much the same. Make sure they don't miss their stop, pick up rubbish, make sure you catch a fare dodger. Great, I actually quite like that as a system, but why didn't they increase that further? Why didn't they go to town with that? Also, why do I care that people fall asleep on my bus? I've been drunk many a time, I'm sure as you guys have.
Here you go.
What does the bus driver do? Does he wake you up? No, he doesn't. He lets you go right to the end of the line. I shouldn't have to let people know that they're asleep on a bus. It makes absolutely no sense to me. Likewise, how do you know that they're asleep? The game just tells you. There's nothing for you to discover yourself. From a customer perspective, my word, the variation is strange at best. I don't know if there's some kind of algorithm that is working this out randomly. You've got people, a lot of people actually, for some reason on my buses had green hair. You don't have children on buses or mums or families coming on with strollers that would have just made it a little bit more interesting. They do represent handicapped people, so that's good, but again, the variation in families and kids is non-existent, but ultimately they just look shit, and there's no way around that. And I just feel like compared to to last time, there's been no improvement. It's just lazy. It just feels that overall, the purpose of running a bus company and driving a bus is to serve the customers, and they just haven't really captured that aspect for me, other than just a few little things that you have to do, and it just hasn't changed from 2018 whatsoever. So let's talk sound. Now, this has been a big criticism of 2021. It's pretty basic in terms of sound. That's okay, but I think a lot of people have noted that the buses all sound the same as they did in 2018. It looks like they've maybe just tweaked or repurposed what was before. The buses don't really sound any different. To me, it's not a massive issue. I mean, I'm not kind of a bus geek in that sense. I mean, I understand if that is what people go for, like they would on a train simulator. I appreciate that point, but for me, it's not a deal breaker. However, in general, I just think the sounds are pretty average, guys. I mean, there's nothing there that kind of makes anything stand out, or things that the kind of cues that you might need. There's no screeching of the wheels if you're taking a corner too fast. The chatter among customers is mundane. I guess it would be, but if you're going to make it mundane, at least try for a game, make it a little bit humorous, and it just doesn't exist. I'd love to have just heard a bit more in terms of the weather variation, more sounds from the city. You think of Grand Theft Auto and just how different that sounds in different parts of the city, and the different types of chatter that you hear. Now, of course, Rockstar, different ball game in terms of resource, but I just don't think it had any inventive thinking around what they had, and that's what they could have got through. Now, graphically, it's not too bad. I mean, I've played other games, you've seen other reviews of simulators that I do. There's nothing in here that makes me think that Bus Simulator 2021 is worse than others. In fact, it's certainly one of the better ones. It's an improvement from 2018. I would argue and say it's more of a lick of paint than I would say it's a kind of an overhaul. Things do look nicer. It runs quite well on my machine. But in saying that, I've heard of others complain with their kind of high rig and medium rig setups. A game like this shouldn't really be causing too many issues. In fairness to the developers, I have seen on Steam that they are asking for feedback from the community, because they do want to get to the bottom of it, so I'll give them credit. There's some nice touches in terms of weather effects, and the textures within the bus itself I think look quite nice. As you walk through the bus, they look quite good. I'm still not convinced on the outside of the bus. It's all a bit too clean and a bit too shiny for my liking. I would love to have seen some kind of degradation over time, or as you're driving a bus for a particularly long route, that it's no longer shiny at the end of it, and you have to pay for a maintenance wash or something along those lines. Likewise, of course, if you crash into anything, nothing happens to your bus. Again, a lot of games will do this, American Truck Simulator being one. I just feel like there is something there that they could have added, just to kind of bring a little bit more realism to the maintenance of buses, and kind of how you have to ensure that you drive the bus well. It just doesn't feel like there's any consequence. Another area graphically I just feel has been missed out are the side mirrors, wing mirrors. Now, in a game like Bus Simulator, it's absolutely critical that you don't pull off from a bus stop as people are getting on and off buses, or when you're pulling out, you need to be ensuring that the roads are safe. Now, even when you set this to ultra in terms of reflections, you can tell that they've put it to either a 30 frames per second or even lower in terms of what's happening in the world. And I just find that a little bit immersive breaking as I'm kind of looking into my mirrors, and I kind of see this almost pixel art motion going on in the background. Another example of piss poor implementation is really around the progression system of the game. So I've sort of mentioned how you upgrade your bus stations and whatnot. To open up the map, you have to make sure that you do all those missions, and I've been playing this for 10 hours now, and Jesus Christ, it keeps on going, and I still haven't opened up all the parts that I want to open up, to the point where I've kind of just given up now. I've put my time into this. I'd like to see it, what it plays like in those other cities, but it's just too long, it's too grindy. They need to have shortened that down in a big way. The traffic itself doesn't play particularly well. You can see in this example I came across a traffic jam. Just so you know, this traffic jam always happens at this point on this particular part of the map. Always, always, always. And you can see that people are indicating left, and so I just assumed at first it was a junction. Upon closer inspection, it's not a junction. In fact, it's just a straight bit of road that bends, and so there is no need to stop and there's no need to indicate. And in fact, I found that quite a lot as I was turning some quite tight corners. I realised that when I put my indicator on, the game would actually give me credit for using indicators correctly, when of course you wouldn't indicate in real life, you're just turning a corner. And so from a traffic and kind of driving perspective, there's clearly something amiss, and they kind of need to tidy that up. I also find the lighting a little bit off in places. I mentioned this, funny enough, about Gas Station Simulator, in that for whatever reason at night time some things don't reflect shadows. You can see on my character, shadows are just not reflected depending on where I stand. The headlights of other cars, I'd love to have seen a bit more variation in that, how some cars might accidentally leave their kind of full beam headlights on and blind you and make the driving more difficult. Art style, it's pretty good. I think what I did like about this over the previous game, in fact, is, I'm going to say biomes, that's probably the wrong way of saying it, but it does feel different in different parts of the city. As you go to Gold Shore, which is more kind of like an open country road really, versus a city, or as you're going across the bridge, it does feel different. I never had that feeling in 2018. Animation wise, I can't defend it, guys. I can't defend it. I see some of the ways that people walk across crossings and the road. I just don't get it. They kind of go into this matrix slow walk just to piss you off. I don't know why. They then sort of run back on themselves, which really comes on to just the way in which the game plays out, and that is that it doesn't feel authentic enough. It doesn't feel like I'm driving the streets, and that's kind of what I want to imagine when I'm playing a game called Bus Simulator. The customers just look, as I've mentioned before, weird, but they also walk strangely. They kind of all clump together as they enter your bus or walk through each other. They walk along the street in a weird manner, not natural whatsoever, and I genuinely believe that their purpose in life is really just to piss you off. Now, it feels like the actual game itself is there to make you succeed, and there's just no real challenge to what's being placed before you. Yes, there's a few speed bumps and potholes that you need to kind of avoid, and you don't want to curb your bus, but ultimately everything just stops for you. Everything is there to make you succeed. How many times I've kind of been driving along the road and I've not had the right of way, nonetheless the cars will just stop for me anyway and let me go through. If I'm approaching a crossing where people are starting to cross, it doesn't matter. They'll quickly turn around and go back the other way to let me keep going forward. It's almost like you have a siren on top of your bus, that as you're going down the street, everyone just kind of parts the way like the Red Sea. The other aspect is the route timetable, which should be a challenge, and that's something I would expect to manage as a driver. So for example, you can see in the bottom left, that's how long I have to get to the next bus stop. Now that in itself as a mechanic, no problem with that. I think that's pretty good. That's what a normal bus driver would have to do, right? The problem is the way it's implemented, and so for whatever reason I just kept getting this kind of notice that I was 300 seconds early. No problem, so I would wait at the bus stop for a particularly long time, a minute or two, in the hope that I could reduce that 300 seconds down. Lo and behold, it still happened. I still got that same message. Now in real life, if that was to happen, I'm sure a bus driver would literally sit at his bus stop for 5 minutes, but then he's getting paid and he's dealing with real people. In a game, it doesn't work, and they need to have created something like a button that you could just click that just kind of put that artificial waiting time in, that you then can just continue your route. Now this is perhaps a strange criticism to say. I felt this, along with Bus Simulator 2018. But I just felt like when I was driving, I was just constantly indicating. It didn't matter where I was driving to. it just felt like if it was either a left turn or a right turn, or I'm pulling into a bus stop or I'm pulling out of a bus stop, like the indicators were always on, and it never felt like I was really driving for a period of time until they came back on again. Now that sounds a bit strange for me to be saying that as a criticism. I guess my argument to that is that really it's the way that the map itself is designed, and actually if anything it's the way in which the bus stops are designed. And so I go back to that auto route feature. That would have been really nice, and just to space out the bus stops. But the way that you are trying to meet objectives, you can approach a bus stop within really what can be just a very short ride, to get to next people, and I just don't really get that. So for me, it just doesn't feel authentic enough. It was only as I got into the later parts of the game where I was able to really spread out some of my routes did it feel more authentic. But I just got pissed off with hearing my indicators non-stop. Now so far, all you've heard from me is a pretty heavy criticism of the game, and so I want to make sure that I balance that with the things that I do like. It has an addictive game loop, very similar to Bus Simulator 18. There is something really nice about driving along the road, picking up passengers, making sure they get their tickets and getting them to a place safely and quickly. I think it plays quite well. Like I said, it's smooth on my system. The sounds aren't incredible, but at the same time, everything does combine to make you feel like you are driving a bus. So I do respect that, and I do enjoy that aspect. It definitely has a pick up and play approach, which I quite enjoyed. So I actually found myself at times spending an hour or two of the game and just kind of going through and building up my routes. I didn't really have much love for my company, the one that I created. I felt it was easy and not too difficult to manage. However, I do really like the fact that they've increased the number of attributes to your company, and kind of the way in which your company is always trying to be bettered, and they've obviously tried to look at ways of implementing that. But that's really where it always falls flat in this game: implementation. If you haven't played these games before, absolutely dive into this. I think it's going to be a lot of fun for you, and you'll get longevity out of it. If you have Bus Simulator 18 and you played that to death, it's going to be a hard one for me to recommend, to be honest with you guys. I don't think there's enough there that warrants the money. Maybe get it on sale in a couple of months and see how it goes in terms of development, and if they launch a few more patches for it. But as of now, I just feel like the game is a big missed opportunity, and it could have been and should have been so much better if it weren't for these stupid mechanics that they introduced in terms of route building. So as ever guys, thank you for checking in, and look forward to seeing you next time. Happy driving.
Perfect place. It's a bookshop.